I visited my father without warning. When I arrived, he froze at the door and pulled me inside. Come in quickly. Hide right now. I did not even have time to ask anything. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I heard my husband's voice. And what came next shattered my reality. My name is Fiona, 34 years old, and I spent a decade letting my family think I was a boring, underachieving actuary. I wore sensible shoes bought off the rack and smiled politely while they mocked me. They had no idea I was quietly running one of the most ruthless private equity firms on the East Coast. Before I reveal the secret that burned their perfect lives to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth. The air was crisp that Saturday afternoon as I pulled my modest sedan up the winding gravel driveway of my father's Connecticut estate. The sprawling property with its ivy-covered stone walls and perfectly manicured hedges was a monument to William's obsession with status. I was there simply to drop off his birthday gift. It was a vintage pocket watch I had spent months tracking down wrapped in unassuming brown paper, so he would not suspect I had spent a small fortune on it. I walked up the grand stone steps and rang the doorbell expecting the housekeeper to answer. Instead, the heavy oak door swung open to reveal my father. William stood there, his face drained of color, his eyes wide with a panic I had never seen before. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He grabbed me by the forearm with a bruising grip and yanked me across the threshold. "Come in quickly. Hide right now." His voice was a frantic whisper. He dragged me across the marble foyer toward the deep, louvered coat closet beneath the grand staircase. I stumbled in my practical heels, completely disoriented. "Dad, what is going on? Are you in trouble?" I asked, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. Was he bankrupt? Did he owe money to dangerous people? He shoved me into the darkness of the closet without answering. "Stay quiet and do not come out until I tell you." He slammed the door shut, plunging me into pitch black. The smell of mothballs and expensive wool coats surrounded me. I pressed my hands against the wooden slats of the closet door, trying to steady my breathing. I expected to hear the heavy boots of a loan shark or the aggressive shouts of men demanding payment. Instead, the heavy front door opened again, and a familiar laugh echoed through the foyer. It was a bright, musical laugh that I had heard every day of my childhood. Isabella. My younger sister, the undeniable golden child of our family, stepped into the entryway. But she was not alone. Walking right beside her, his fingers intimately laced with hers, was Jason, my husband of 7 years. My chest tightened so violently, I thought my ribs might crack. Jason was supposed to be at a weekend consulting conference in Boston. He had kissed me goodbye that morning, promising to call me from his hotel. Yet here he was, standing in my father's foyer, pressing a lingering kiss to my younger sister's temple. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the gasp clawing at my throat. Through the narrow wooden slats of the closet door, my view was perfectly framed. I watched in paralyzed silence as my father walked back into the foyer, holding a tray with 3 crystal tumblers of his best scotch. William did not look angry. He did not punch my husband in the jaw for touching his youngest daughter. He simply handed Jason a drink with a warm, conspiratorial smile. I could not reconcile what I was seeing. My father was serving scotch to the man who was blatantly betraying his other daughter. Isabella kicked off her designer heels and leaned against Jason's chest, taking a sip of her drink. "Thank God that is over," she sighed dramatically. "I do not think I could have pretended to respect Fiona for one more minute this weekend. She is so exhausting." Jason chuckled, wrapping his free arm around Isabella's waist. He kissed her neck right in front of my father. "I know, babe. Living with a mousy, penny-pinching actuary is draining the life out of me. I swear she still buys her clothes off the rack. It drags down the whole family's image." I stood frozen among the winter coats, the fabric of my sensible trench coat suddenly feeling like lead. For years I had deliberately downplayed my wealth. I wanted Jason to love me for who I was, not for the empire I was quietly building. I had played the role of the boring mid-level corporate drone to perfection, and this was my reward. Being mocked by the man I loved and the sister who had always treated me like dirt. William took a slow sip of his scotch, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Isabella is right, Jason. Fiona has always lacked vision. She lacks that ambition, that fire. She was always perfectly content to just sit in the background and run numbers for other people. I tried to push her to be something more, to be someone worthy of our family name, but she chose to be painfully ordinary. I listened to my father dismiss my entire existence. This was the man I had spent my 20s trying to please. I remembered all those holidays sitting at the far end of the dining table while William praised Isabella for her luxury public relations firm, praising her for being a visionary. Whenever I tried to speak about my work in the financial sector, he would cut me off and change the subject to Isabella's latest magazine feature. I had swallowed that pain to keep the peace. I had let them believe their own narrative because it was easier than fighting for their validation. Isabella giggled, tracing her manicured finger down the lapel of Jason's expensive jacket. A jacket I had bought for him on our last anniversary. You have to admit, Daddy, it is pretty tragic. Fiona actually thinks she is an equal partner in this marriage. She probably thinks Jason is sitting in some boring seminar right now taking notes. Jason threw his head back and laughed. That sound, a sound that used to make me smile, now made my blood run cold. She is completely clueless. I told her I was working all weekend to secure our financial future. She packed my bag and kissed me goodbye. She really believes I am out there grinding away for our retirement. The sheer audacity of his lies was breathtaking. Jason's consulting firm had been struggling for over a year. I knew this because I was the one secretly injecting capital into his business accounts through dummy corporations just to keep his pride intact. I had shielded him from his own failures because I loved him. And he was standing in my childhood home, humiliating me for his own amusement. William walked over and clapped Jason on the shoulder. Well, you will not have to play the dutiful husband for much longer. We just need to handle this transition cleanly. We cannot afford any messy public scandals. The family reputation has to remain completely unblemished. Isabella nodded vigorously. Exactly. The press is already hovering around my boutique hotel project. If they catch wind of any trashy family drama, it could ruin my grand opening next month. We need Fiona out of the picture, but we need her to look like she is the one who ruined everything. Jason smiled, a cruel, calculating expression I had never seen before. That is exactly why I set up the timeline for tonight. By the time I get home, I will have the perfect excuse to walk away. And the best part is, she will not fight back. She is too weak. She will just sign whatever I put in front of her to avoid a confrontation. I pressed my back against the cool plaster wall of the closet. The darkness around me felt less like a trap and more like a shield. They thought I was a fragile, naive woman who would simply roll over and let them destroy her. They thought they held all the power. Jason took another sip of his scotch and kissed Isabella again. Do not worry, baby, he promised her. The boring actuary is about to fund our entire future without even knowing it. My hand slipped into my pocket. My fingers closed around my smartphone. I pulled it out, letting the faint glow illuminate my face in the shadows. I opened my recording app and silently hit record. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The red recording symbol blinked steadily on my screen, capturing every word echoing through the marble foyer. Isabella let out an exaggerated sigh, the sound grating against my nerves. She paced across the imported rug, her high heels clicking rhythmically against the polished stone. She complained that the contractors for her luxury boutique hotel were threatening to walk off the job site by Monday morning. She was completely bankrupt. The vendors were demanding immediate payment, the city was threatening to pull her operational permits, and her grand opening gala was scheduled for next month. She whined to our father that if the local press found out she was insolvent, her social standing in the city would be utterly obliterated. She would become a laughingstock at the country club, and her wealthy influencer friends would abandon her without a second thought. She claimed her entire life would be ruined if she did not get a massive influx of cash within the next 24 hours. William poured himself another generous measure of scotch. He told her to calm down, insisting that the family legacy would remain intact. He looked at Jason, his tone shifting from a doting father to a cold, calculating businessman. He asked Jason if he was absolutely sure the funds were available and ready to move. Jason laughed, a smug, arrogant sound that made my stomach turn. He proudly explained that he had been grooming me for this exact moment for over 6 months. He told William that he had convinced me to move $250,000 into our joint savings account. He had spun a beautiful lie about needing liquid assets to prepare for buying our first vacation home together. He actually mocked my reaction, describing how my eyes had lit up at the prospect of finally starting a family and buying a summer house by the lake. He called me pathetic and gullible. He said I transferred the money without a single question, trusting him completely, like a loyal, obedient dog. Isabella snorted loudly. She called me a pathetic desk jockey who was desperate for any crumbs of affection. She wrapped her arms tightly around Jason's neck, asking him how much longer she had to sneak around like a secret. She complained that the smell of my cheap vanilla lotion on his clothes was making her physically sick. Jason kissed her forehead and promised her the wait was finally over. The plan was fully in motion. He was going to initiate the wire transfer from the joint account directly into a shell company he had set up under Isabella's name. Once the money was cleared, her hotel would be saved, the contractors would be paid in full, and she would get all the glory of a highly successful, glamorous launch. Nobody would ever know the money came from her older sister's drained bank account. William tapped his crystal glass against the mahogany side table, his brow furrowed in thought. He pointed out a glaring flaw in Jason's plan. He reminded my husband that I was an actuary, a woman who looked at complex spreadsheets and financial models all day for a living. He warned Jason that the moment the $250,000 vanished from the joint account, I would instantly notice. I would freeze the accounts, call the bank fraud department, and likely hire a forensic accountant to track the missing funds. William demanded to know how Jason planned to get away with draining our life savings without triggering a massive legal battle that could drag their names through the mud. Jason smiled, pacing toward the grand staircase, stepping right in front of my hiding spot. He explained his strategy with chilling precision. He was heading home tonight to pick a massive fight. He planned to manufacture an explosive argument over something entirely trivial, like me working too late or ignoring his emotional needs. He said he would aggressively escalate the conflict until he could convincingly demand an immediate separation. He wanted to storm out of the house in a righteous fury, claiming he needed space, making me believe I was the one destroying our marriage. While I was busy crying and begging him to stay, the money would already be gone, and he would claim he took it to secure alternative housing during our trial separation. But William was not satisfied with that answer. He reminded Jason about the prenuptial agreement. When Jason and I married, I had insisted on a standard prenup to protect my modest early investments. William scoffed at the memory, saying he had always thought my prenup was a hilarious joke, considering I was just a mid-level employee at a boring accounting firm. However, William noted that the document clearly protected my half of the marital assets in the event of infidelity or financial abuse. If I hired a ruthless divorce lawyer and proved Jason emptied the joint account to fund his mistress, the prenup would heavily penalize him and force him to repay every single cent. Jason leaned against the banister, mere inches from the louvered door, hiding my face. I could smell the expensive cologne I had bought for him last Christmas. He lowered his voice, explaining that the prenup had a specific nullification clause. If either party was deemed mentally unfit or required institutional psychiatric care, the healthy spouse would be granted full, uncontested control over the marital assets. Jason looked my father right in the eye and asked for a massive favor. He needed William and Barbara to serve as false witnesses in the impending divorce proceedings. He needed my own parents to sign sworn legal affidavits stating that I had been suffering from severe mental instability for months. I stopped breathing. The darkness of the closet felt suffocating, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. My own father, the man who had raised me, The man I had spent my entire adult life trying to make proud was standing 10 feet away, calmly considering a plan to legally declare me insane. Jason laid out the sinister narrative. They would claim I had been acting erratic, paranoid, and deeply depressed. They would tell the judge that I had been making wild, delusional accusations about Jason and Isabella having a secret affair. Because my claims would sound so outlandish, the court would view them as severe delusions rather than reality. Jason would play the tragic, devoted husband, forced to take control of the finances to stop his mentally ill wife from ruining their lives. He would look like a hero, saving me from myself. William did not hesitate. He did not defend his eldest daughter. He took a slow sip of his scotch and nodded his head. He agreed to the plan without a single ounce of remorse or hesitation. He told Jason that my mother Barbara would happily provide a matching testimony to the courts. William reasoned that sacrificing my personal reputation was a very small price to pay to ensure Isabella's boutique hotel succeeded, and the family maintained its pristine social standing. He called it tough love. He said it was the intervention needed to protect the family legacy from my bitter personality. Isabella cheered loudly, clapping her hands together in delight. She praised our father, calling him a brilliant genius, and wrapped Jason in another tight, passionate embrace. They had mapped out my entire destruction. They were going to steal my hard-earned money, shatter my marriage, brand me as a lunatic in a court of law, and strip me of my dignity, all to fund a failing luxury project for the golden child. They truly believed I was a weak, defenseless number cruncher who would collapse under the weight of their coordinated gaslighting. They thought I would cry, beg for their forgiveness, and sign whatever papers they put in front of me just to stop the emotional pain. They assumed I would fade quietly into the background just like I always did. I would never let them win this twisted game. They had severely miscalculated everything. Jason pulled his phone from his tailored slacks with a triumphant grin. He announced that there was no point in waiting any longer. He was going to initiate the wire transfer right now, moving the money out of our joint account and into Isabella's hidden offshore company. He tapped the glowing screen, navigating to his banking app, bragging to William about how incredibly easy it was going to be to rob me blind. In the darkness of the closet, I did not shed a tear. My hands did not shake. I simply lowered my recording device, having successfully captured every damning syllable of their malicious conspiracy. I opened my own banking app on my phone. The harsh blue light illuminated my cold, hard smile. Let Jason try to transfer the funds. Let him tap the screen. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the boring actuary. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the harsh blue light barely illuminating the cramped closet space. I slowly navigated past the primary checking interface and accessed the hidden joint savings portal. Jason and I had opened this account 5 years ago to build our perfect dream life. He thought he had full administrative control. He thought the $250,000 sitting there was ripe for the taking unprotected from his greedy fingers. As an actuary, I spent my life evaluating risk. Marrying a man whose consulting firm perpetually hovered on the brink of insolvency was a massive risk. I structured the account with a dual authorization mandate for any transfer exceeding $10,000, but I also buried a master override code in the fine print. A code only I possessed. Outside the closet, I heard the clinking of crystal glasses. My father was pouring another round of his expensive scotch. Isabella was giggling, vibrating with excitement over her impending financial rescue. Jason was boasting about his brilliance, narrating his actions as he logged into his banking portal. I had to move faster than his arrogant fingers. My thumbs flew across the digital keyboard with practiced precision. I quickly bypassed the standard security protocols, entered my unique master override, and accessed the core funds. I did not just freeze the account. Freezing it would only delay the inevitable and give Jason time to rally his lawyers. Instead, I executed an immediate and complete full balance sweep. I selected the destination account. It was not another standard bank. It was an offshore blind trust I had established nearly 7 years ago under a labyrinth of corporate shell companies. The trust was legally impenetrable, designed to shield my assets from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. I hit confirm. The screen displayed a loading circle for 2 agonizing seconds before flashing a bright green checkmark. Transaction successful. The balance on the joint account instantly plummeted from $250,000 to absolutely zero. I locked my phone and slipped it back into the pocket of my sensible trench coat. For a decade, I wore this coat like a suit of armor. I intentionally cultivated the persona of Fiona, the dull middle management actuary. I drove a reliable sedan. I packed my lunches in reusable containers. I patiently let Jason patronize me about my lack of ambition, while he recklessly blew through his meager earnings trying to look like a high roller. I let my father and sister treat me like the embarrassing stain on our prestigious family tree. They genuinely thought I spent my days hunched over a tiny cubicle desk calculating insurance premiums and pension risks. They were completely oblivious to the truth. I did not work in a cubicle. I owned the building. 10 years ago, using a modest inheritance from my maternal grandmother that my father failed to seize, I quietly founded a private equity firm. I named it Vanguard Zenith. While Isabella blew her allowance on designer handbags, and Jason failed upward in the consulting world, I was ruthlessly acquiring distressed assets, restructuring failing corporations, and building a financial empire. I was the silent majority shareholder, the unseen architect behind some of the most aggressive corporate takeovers on the East Coast. My board of directors answered only to me. I managed portfolios worth billions, not thousands. The $250,000 I just moved was pocket change, a fraction of my actual net worth. But it was the principle. It was my money, and I was going to make sure they choked on their own greed. I pressed my ear against the wooden slats of the door. Jason was still bragging to William about how smooth the interface on the new banking app was. He had not hit submit yet. I had beaten him to the punch by a matter of seconds. Now it was time for me to disappear before the fallout began. I knew the layout of this estate better than anyone. I spent my childhood hiding in these exact shadows, avoiding my father's harsh temper and my sister's cruel pranks. I slowly turned the brass knob of the closet door, waiting for a burst of laughter from the foyer to mask the soft click of the latch. I pushed the door open a fraction of an inch. The hallway was clear. William, Jason, and Isabella had migrated toward the formal living room, their backs turned to the entryway as they admired the large marble fireplace. I slipped out of the closet, my practical rubber-soled shoes making absolutely no sound on the polished hardwood floor. I did not head for the front door. The heavy oak would creak and give me away. Instead, I moved silently down the long, dimly lit corridor toward the servant quarters and the side entrance. As I walked past the mahogany sideboards and tapestries, I glanced at the framed family portraits. There was William standing tall and projecting the image of the perfect patriarch. There was Barbara, my mother, wearing her signature forced smile. There was Isabella positioned front and center, the beautiful and successful golden child. And then there was me placed slightly to the side, dressed in muted colors blending into the background. I spent my entire life shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I accepted their constant belittling because I believed that was the cost of family loyalty. When I met Jason, I thought I finally found someone who loved the unassuming version of me. I shielded him from my wealth because I wanted a marriage built on equal partnership, not financial dependency. I wanted to be loved, not used. What a spectacular fool I had been. They did not just want to use me, they wanted to destroy me. They wanted to have me committed to a psychiatric ward, locked away and pumped full of medication, just so Isabella could save face at our country club luncheons. The sheer sociopathy of their plan washed over me, burning away any lingering shreds of familial affection or marital devotion. The Fiona who cared about their approval died right there in that hallway. In her place, the CEO of Vanguard Zenith took the wheel. The woman who dismantled rival corporations before breakfast was now turning her sights on her own family. I reached the side door, slipping the deadbolt open with practiced ease. The cool Connecticut air hit my face, refreshing and sharp. I stepped out onto the cobblestone path and quietly pulled the door shut until I heard the soft click of the lock engaging. I walked briskly toward the dark guest parking area where I had left my unassuming sedan. The gravel crunched softly under my feet. I reached my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. The leather interior was freezing cold, but my blood was running hot with pure adrenaline and anticipation. I did not start the engine immediately. I took a moment to shed the disguise I wore for so long. I unbuttoned the drab trench coat and tossed it into the passenger seat. I pulled the elastic band from my hair, letting my dark curls fall loose. I opened the center console and pulled out a tube of crimson lipstick, applying it flawlessly. I stared at my reflection. The boring actuary was gone. The predator had arrived. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, my grip firm and resolute. I knew exactly what was happening inside that sprawling mansion. Jason would be staring at his phone screen, a confused frown marring his face. He would tap the refresh button, assuming it was a simple glitch. William would be taking another sip of his scotch, confidently waiting for the confirmation that his golden child was saved. Isabella would be examining her manicured nails, dreaming about the expensive floral arrangements for her grand opening gala. I rolled down my window just a fraction, letting the crisp evening breeze flow into the cabin. I wanted to hear it. I needed to hear the exact moment the illusion shattered. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine purring to life. I shifted the car into drive gear, slowly easing my foot off the brake. The tires rolled slowly over the loose gravel, inching toward the main iron gates. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Just as the front bumper of my car aligned with the towering brick pillars of the driveway entrance, a sound cut through the tranquil silence. It was not a laugh. It was a sharp, guttural yell echoing from the open windows of the formal living room. I stopped the car, holding my breath. Jason's voice carried across the lawn, frantic and high-pitched with sudden, absolute panic. "William," he shouted, his words vibrating with raw terror. "William, the bank just rejected the transfer. The account is locked." I left the gravel driveway behind, the echo of Jason's panicked scream fading into the crisp Connecticut evening. The drive back to our shared home took 40 minutes, but it felt like 5. My mind was a steel trap, perfectly compartmentalizing the agony of a 7-year marriage built on a foundation of absolute lies. I did not shed a single tear on the highway. Crying was for women who lacked leverage, and I had all the leverage in the world. I pulled into the garage of our modern colonial house. It was a beautiful property surrounded by old oak trees and featuring a wraparound porch that I had always envisioned our future children playing on. I had discreetly paid for the vast majority of the down payment, funneling the money through a joint investment account to let Jason believe his meager consulting bonuses had secured our dream home. The interior was a testament to my hard work, filled with custom furniture and expensive art that I claimed were clever thrift store finds. I had spent years protecting his fragile masculine ego, propping him up so he could feel like the provider he desperately wanted to be. I walked through the mudroom and into our pristine white marble kitchen. The silence of the empty house was comforting. I filled the electric kettle, watched the water come to a rapid boil, and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, letting the steam warm my face. I moved to the living room, taking a seat on the plush velvet sofa. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my sensible skirt, a garment chosen specifically to blend in. I crossed my legs, cradled the warm mug in my hands, and waited. I knew Jason would not stay at the estate to comfort Isabella. The locked joint account would force him to pivot his entire strategy. He would come rushing back here to execute the next phase of his pathetic plan. He needed money, and he needed it tonight. I watched the antique grandfather clock in the hallway tick away the minutes. My pulse was entirely steady. 30 minutes later, the heavy oak front door flew open with such force it slammed violently against the entryway wall. Jason stormed into the house. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his face was flushed with an engineered theatrical rage. He did not seem to notice how perfectly calm I looked sitting in the dim light of the living room. He threw his expensive leather briefcase across the foyer. It crashed into the console table, sending a decorative silver bowl clattering to the floor. I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the floral notes completely unfazed by his manufactured tantrum. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, marching into the living room and glaring down at me with absolute contempt. "I have been calling you for an hour. I just wanted to tell you I was coming home early from the conference, and you send me straight to voicemail. You are completely checked out of this marriage, Fiona. You never listen to me. You never support my dreams." I remained silent, letting him dig the hole deeper. His chest heaved as he paced back and forth across the Persian rug. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. This was the fight he had promised Isabella and William. The great confrontation meant to justify his sudden departure and paint me as the villain. "You sit there drinking tea while I am out there killing myself to provide for us," he continued, his voice rising in volume. "You are so cold. You are entirely devoid of emotion. I live with a robot. All you care about are your spreadsheets and your little corporate routines. You do not care about me. You do not care about our future. You are a neglectful, frigid wife who treats this marriage like a business transaction." I watched the vein pulsing in his neck. It was truly a marvel to witness his hypocrisy. He was accusing me of treating our marriage like a transaction on the very night he had attempted to wire $250,000 of our joint savings to his mistress. His projection was textbook. I lowered my teacup to the saucer with a soft clink. "Are you quite finished, Jason?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly mild. My lack of a dramatic emotional reaction threw him off balance for a fraction of a second. He had expected tears. He had expected me to jump up and beg him to calm down, to apologize for whatever perceived slight he was weaponizing against me. When I merely stared at him with cold, calculating eyes, he aggressively shifted to the next phase of his script. "No, I am not finished," he spat, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded sheaf of thick legal paper and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table between us. "I am out there trying to manage my firm, trying to keep us afloat, and the government decides to flag my business accounts for a minor routine audit. It is a standard compliance check, but it is freezing up my capital. I need you to sign this right now." I glanced down at the document, then back up at his flushed face. "What exactly is it?" I asked. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, attempting to loom over me and use his physical size to intimidate me into compliance. "It is a routine tax liability waiver," he lied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "My lawyer drew it up this afternoon. Because our finances are tied together, the audit could temporarily freeze your personal accounts too. By signing this, you are formally separating your tax liability from my consulting firm. It protects you. It protects us. I just need your signature on the last page so I can email it to my accountant tonight." "It is standard procedure, Fiona. Just sign the paper and prove to me that you actually care about our future, instead of just sitting there like a stone." He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a silver pen, and tossed it onto the papers. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I slowly picked up the document. I ignored the signature page he was pointing to and flipped directly to the first page. Jason let out an exasperated, dramatic sigh, shifting his weight from foot to foot, as if my reading the contract was an agonizing inconvenience. "For heaven's sake, Fiona, it is standard legal boilerplate. You do not need to read the whole thing. I am exhausted and I want to go to bed. Just sign it." I ignored him. As an actuary and the secret head of a massive private equity firm, reading the fine print was my actual superpower. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, instantly translating the legal jargon that would confuse an ordinary person. The wording was incredibly predatory, designed to strip a spouse of every single financial safeguard imaginable. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the operative clause buried on page 3. It was not a tax liability waiver. It was a post-nuptial agreement, and it was devastatingly specific. The clause stated that in the event of a marital separation or divorce, I would willingly surrender all equity rights and claims to our marital home, transferring sole ownership to Jason. It also included a sweeping indemnification clause, waiving my right to seek spousal support or lay claim to any business assets tied to his name. He was trying to trick me into signing away my house so he and Isabella could live in it. The sheer arrogance of it was almost impressive. He genuinely believed I was stupid enough to blindly sign a legal document just because he yelled at me and claimed it was a financial emergency. I looked up from the paper, letting my eyes meet his. He shifted uncomfortably under my intense gaze, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He opened his mouth to press the issue further, ready to unleash another wave of scripted anger. Before I could utter a single word to dismantle his pathetic trap, the heavy front door burst open once again. Loud footsteps echoed in the foyer, accompanied by hushed, urgent voices. It was Barbara, my mother, and right beside her was Isabella. They marched into the living room, their faces arranged in masks of deep, manufactured sorrow. They had arrived for a surprise intervention. My mother marched into my living room as if she owned the very foundation it was built upon. Barbara always commanded a room with the terrifying authority of a military general wrapped in cashmere and diamonds. The heavy scent of her signature perfume instantly suffocated the delicate floral aroma of my chamomile tea. Right behind her, clutching a designer handbag like a polished shield, was Isabella. My younger sister wore an expression of deep, manufactured concern that looked as if she had practiced it in front of a vanity mirror for hours on end. Jason immediately dropped his aggressive, domineering posture. His shoulders slumped forward in an instant display of defeat, and he let out a long, ragged sigh of relief. He actually had the audacity to run his hands frantically through his hair to make himself look more disheveled and victimized. "Barbara, thank God you are here," he said, his voice dripping with a fake, exhausted tremor. "I tried to talk to her. I tried to be reasonable and explain the situation, but she is completely irrational. She refuses to protect our family." Barbara did not even look at Jason. Her cold, piercing gaze was locked entirely on me. She walked over to the antique armchair opposite my sofa, refusing to sit, choosing instead to tower over me like a judge, preparing to deliver a guilty verdict. Isabella hovered just behind Jason, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder, in a gesture of solidarity that made my stomach churn with disgust. "Fiona, I am profoundly disappointed in you," Barbara began. Her voice was sharp, measured, and designed to cut straight to the bone. "Jason called us this afternoon in absolute tears. He told us how difficult you have been lately. He told us how you are constantly picking fights, hoarding your miserable little paycheck, and actively driving a wedge into this family." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on my lap. Jason had called them this afternoon. That meant this entire ambush had been coordinated hours before they even arrived at my father's house for their celebratory scotch. They had mapped out every single step of my psychological destruction. "I am not driving a wedge into anything, Mother," I said, keeping my tone completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Jason is demanding I sign a post-nuptial agreement surrendering my rights to my own home." "Do not use that tone with me," Barbara snapped, pointing a diamond-clad finger directly at my face. "You have always been incredibly selfish, Fiona. You only ever think about your spreadsheets and your petty little grievances. You have absolutely no concept of family loyalty or shared sacrifice. Jason is out there building a consulting business to support you, and you cannot even sign a simple piece of paper to protect him from a temporary tax issue. You are suffocating him with your relentless paranoia." I looked at the thick stack of paper on the table. "It is not a tax waiver. It signs the house over to him entirely." Barbara crossed her arms over her chest, completely unfazed. "And so what if it does? It is a necessary protective measure. You are acting exactly like you did when you were 18 years old. You are so fiercely hoarding what is yours without caring about the bigger picture. You have always been so utterly small-minded." She took a deliberate step closer, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "Do you remember when I had to practically force you to empty your college savings account? Do you remember crying over those pathetic pennies? I needed that money to pay for Isabella's debutante gala. It was her introduction to high society. It was absolutely essential for our family standing in this community. But you fought me tooth and nail over it. You threw a massive tantrum over a meaningless college fund. You did not need that money to be a desk jockey. You did not need a fancy education to sit in a gray cubicle and push buttons all day. Isabella needed to shine, and you tried to ruin her moment because you were bitter and jealous. The memory hit me, but not with the sharp pain she intended. I remembered being a hardworking teenager handing over the money I had earned working late shifts after school, watching it get blown on ice sculptures and imported champagne for a party I was barely allowed to attend. I remembered the feeling of utter worthlessness that had consumed me for months. But sitting here now as the secret CEO and founder of Vanguard Zenith, her insult was almost comical in its ignorance. "You are doing the exact same thing now," Barbara continued, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet living room. "You are clinging to this house out of pure spite. Jason needs financial flexibility to manage his firm. He needs this major asset protected from the audit. If you truly loved him, you would sign it without a second thought. Instead, you are sitting there acting like a victim while he is having a nervous breakdown right in front of you." Jason buried his face in his hands, letting out a stifled, dramatic groan that belonged on a theater stage. "I just want peace, Fiona. I just want to know you have my back for once. I cannot keep fighting the corporate world and fighting my own wife at the same time. It is tearing me apart." Isabella finally made her move. She stepped around the glass coffee table, her eyes shining with unshed crocodile tears. She knelt gracefully beside the sofa, positioning herself right next to Jason's legs. She reached out and took his arm, stroking his sleeve with a gentle, comforting rhythm. It was a blatant display of physical ownership, thinly disguised as innocent familial support. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling perfectly. "Fiona, please," she begged, her voice thick with fake sugary sympathy. "Look at what you are doing to him. He is exhausted. We are all exhausted. We just want you to be happy, but you make it so incredibly hard." I watched her hand resting softly on his arm. I watched the way his shoulders relaxed as he leaned into her touch. They were practically rubbing their secret affair in my face right inside my own living room, entirely secure in the belief that I was too dense and trusting to notice the blatant physical intimacy flowing between them. "Just sign the paper," Isabella whispered, letting a single tear fall down her flawless cheek. "Stop making everything so difficult. Stop fighting everyone who tries to help you. It is why people cannot stand being around you. You push everyone away with this cold, stubborn attitude. Just do this one thing for your husband. Save your marriage before it is too late." The sheer level of coordinated gaslighting was a masterpiece of emotional abuse. If I had not spent the afternoon locked in a dark coat closet, listening to their true malicious intentions, I might have actually believed I was the villain. I might have severely questioned my own sanity. I might have looked at my weeping sister, my highly stressed husband, and my commanding mother, and concluded that I was indeed a cold, selfish woman who was actively destroying her own life. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew Jason's independent consulting firm was fully funded by my own secret corporate investments. I knew Isabella's luxury boutique hotel was facing catastrophic imminent bankruptcy. I knew Jason planned to drain our joint savings account tonight to bail her out of her financial mess. I knew they were planning to use this very argument as documented evidence of my supposed mental instability in divorce court. They wanted to take my house, take my life savings, and leave me with nothing but a ruined personal reputation. I looked at my mother, who was glaring down at me with undisguised bitter contempt. I looked at my husband, who was hiding a triumphant smirk behind his trembling hands. I looked at my sister, who was intimately holding the man she was sleeping with while telling me nobody could ever stand to be around me. They desperately wanted a weak, broken woman. They wanted a submissive, boring actuary who would immediately fold under the intense pressure of a coordinated family intervention. They needed me to play the part of the hysterical wife so their narrative would work flawlessly in front of a judge. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I decided to give them the performance of a lifetime. I let my posture crumble, my shoulders slumping forward against the velvet cushions. I took a deep, shaky breath, making sure my breathing sounded ragged and entirely uneven. I forced my eyes to widen, letting a look of complete, overwhelming defeat wash over my face. I blinked rapidly, mimicking the behavior of someone desperately holding back a flood of tears. I looked down at my hands, letting them tremble slightly in my lap. Fiona Barbara snapped, her patience completely wearing thin. "Do not play the martyr right now. Be an adult and sign the document." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice in protest. I did not point out the blatant lies or the absurdities of their claims. I slowly reached out toward the glass coffee table. My fingers brushed against the heavy legal stock paper. I picked up the silver pen Jason had so aggressively tossed down moments earlier. The cold metal felt solid and reassuring against my skin. I looked at the three of them. I looked at their eager, greedy faces waiting for their ultimate triumph. I lowered my head in mock defeat, picking up the pen. "You are right. I should sign," I whispered. I uncapped the heavy silver pen. The metallic slide of the cap sounded unnaturally loud in the silent living room. Barbara crossed her arms, a look of profound satisfaction settling over her sharp features. She genuinely believed her aggressive tirade had finally broken my spirit. Isabella leaned her head against Jason's shoulder, her performance of the concerned, supportive sister reaching its sickening climax. Jason stood tall, his chest puffing out with the arrogant confidence of a man who thought he had just won the lottery. He watched my hand hovering over the paper, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed. I did not put the pen to his fraudulent post-nuptial agreement. I smoothly bypassed the thick stack of legal lies he had thrown onto the glass coffee table. Instead, I reached inside the inner pocket of my tailored skirt. My fingers brushed against the crisp single sheet of premium cardstock I had folded and tucked away before leaving the estate. I pulled the document out and laid it squarely over his fake tax waiver. I pressed the tip of the silver pen to the signature line at the bottom of my page. I signed my name with deliberate, sweeping strokes. I did not rush. I took my time, pressing the ink into the paper with absolute authority. The final loop of my signature felt like the closing of a heavy iron gate. I set the pen down gently on the glass. I picked up my signed document and slid it across the smooth surface of the coffee table directly toward Jason. He snatched the paper up before it even stopped moving. He did not bother looking at the text immediately. He turned to Isabella, flashing her a brilliant, triumphant smirk. Isabella mirrored his expression, her fake tears instantly vanishing, replaced by a cold, calculating grin. Barbara let out a sharp breath of vindication, already preparing her next lecture on how I needed to be more obedient moving forward. They were practically vibrating with shared victory. Then Jason finally looked down at the paper in his hands. I watched the exact second the illusion shattered. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His triumphant smirk did not just fade. It fell off his face completely, replaced by a mask of absolute, unadulterated horror. His hands began to tremble so violently the thick paper rattled in his grip. His eyes darted back and forth across the single paragraph, his brain desperately trying to process the words that were destroying his entire reality. "What is this?" He choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "This is not the tax waiver. Fiona, what is this?" Isabella frowned, her triumphant grin slipping away. She reached out and grabbed Jason's arm. "Jason, what is wrong? What did she sign? Tell me she signed the house over." Barbara stepped forward, her maternal authority suddenly laced with genuine uncertainty. "Fiona, what kind of trick are you playing? I demand to know what you just gave him." I uncrossed my legs and sat back against the velvet cushions, feeling completely at peace. "I did not sign your ridiculous post-nuptial agreement, Jason," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady in the quiet room. "The pathetic little actuary you thought you could manipulate does not exist. You brought a poorly drafted piece of fiction to a woman who dismantles corporate empires for a living." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The paper continued to shake in his hands. "What you are holding is a corporate dissolution notice," I explained, articulating every single syllable with chilling precision. It is a legally binding immediate execution of asset seizure and corporate liquidation. Jason took a stumbling step backward, his legs hitting the edge of the sofa. He dropped heavily onto the cushions, the paper slipping from his fingers and landing face up on the rug. Isabella snatched it off the floor, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. She looked completely lost, unable to comprehend the financial terminology, but she could clearly read the terror radiating from her lover. "You cannot dissolve my firm," Jason stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have absolutely no legal authority over my consulting business. I am the sole owner. I built that firm from the ground up. You are just my wife. You have no shares. You have no equity. You cannot do this." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound sent a visible shiver down Barbara's spine. "Oh, Jason," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You really are incredibly dense. You never built anything from the ground up. You have never been a successful businessman. You have been playing a very expensive game of dress-up, and I have been funding your little costume party for 5 years. William never told you, did he?" I asked, turning my gaze to Barbara. My mother looked absolutely bewildered, her confident posture completely unraveling. "Told us what she demanded," her voice rising in pitch. "What are you talking about, Fiona? Stop speaking in riddles." Jason's so-called independent consulting firm has been operating at a massive, catastrophic loss since the day he opened his doors. I revealed, locking eyes with my husband. He is a terrible consultant. He loses clients faster than he finds them. He spends his revenue on expensive lunches, luxury car leases, and tailored suits, trying to impress people who secretly laugh at him behind his back. 4 years ago, his firm was weeks away from complete bankruptcy. He was going to lose everything. Jason swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic croak emerged. "So I bought him," I said, savoring the absolute shock washing over my mother and sister. "I did not hand him a personal check. I am not stupid. I used my private equity firm, Vanguard Zenith." Isabella gasped, dropping the paper. "Vanguard Zenith," she repeated, her voice trembling. "The firm that just bought out the commercial real estate block downtown. The firm everyone at the club is terrified of. You cannot possibly be connected to them. You are just a boring actuary." "I am the founder and sole majority shareholder of Vanguard Zenith," I corrected her, my tone dropping 10 degrees. "I own the building I supposedly work in. I command a portfolio that makes our father's wealth look like a child's piggy bank. And 4 years ago, I instructed one of my shell companies to inject $2 million of venture capital into Jason's failing consulting business to keep him afloat." Jason looked like he was going to be physically sick. He grabbed his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "I was the silent parent company, Jason," I told him, forcing him to look at me. "Vanguard Zenith owns 80% of your firm's equity. You are not a CEO. You are a glorified employee managing a subsidiary branch of my empire, and your performance has been absolutely abysmal. I let you keep playing boss because I thought we were building a life together. I thought you were just incompetent, not malicious. I was willing to absorb your financial losses as the cost of a happy marriage." Barbara stumbled backward, falling into the armchair she had previously refused to sit in. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, staring at me as if she had never seen me before in her entire life. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked for being a poor, unambitious desk jockey was revealing herself to be a financial titan capable of crushing them all. "But then you decided to steal from me," I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You decided to drain our joint savings account to fund Isabella's failing hotel. You decided to manufacture a fake argument, demand I sign away my rights to this house, and conspire with my own family to have me committed to a psychiatric facility just to cover your tracks." Isabella let out a high-pitched sob, realizing that I knew exactly what they had been planning at the estate. She backed away from Jason, pressing herself against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. "You heard us," she whispered. I heard every single disgusting word. I confirmed, my gaze remaining fixed on Jason. "And the moment I heard your pathetic plan, I initiated a full audit of your firm. The document you just read is not a request, Jason. It is a notification." I have officially recalled the initial venture capital loan due to gross financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. What does that mean? He begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. Fiona, please, what does that mean for me? It means you are completely liquidated, I told him, feeling absolutely no mercy. By signing that paper, I executed my right as the majority shareholder to dissolve the subsidiary. I have seized all of your business assets to cover your outstanding corporate debts. I have frozen your operating accounts. Your firm no longer exists. You have absolutely nothing left, and effective immediately, you are fired. Jason fell to his knees on the Persian rug. He clasped his hands together, looking up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. Fiona, you cannot do this. Please. My entire reputation is tied to that firm. I will be ruined in the industry. I will have nothing. I will be bankrupt by morning. You cannot just wipe out my entire life with a single signature. This is a mistake. I love you. The thing with Isabella meant nothing. It was just stress. Please, you cannot do this to me. He was begging. The arrogant man who had proudly plotted my destruction less than an hour ago was now crawling on the floor, weeping and pleading for mercy from the woman he had called a cold, neglectful robot. Barbara sat paralyzed in the armchair, her mouth hanging open, completely incapable of formulating a defense. Isabella was sobbing uncontrollably against the wall, realizing her wealthy savior was now entirely destitute. Her boutique hotel would collapse by Monday, and her social standing would turn to ash. I looked down at Jason, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 10 years finally lifting from my shoulders. The disguise was gone. The boring, submissive actuary was dead. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I reached for the trench coat I had discarded on the sofa earlier, sliding my arms into the sleeves. I buttoned the coat with deliberate, unhurried movements, looking down at the broken man kneeling at my feet. I just did, I replied, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a sentence. And by the way, the locks on this house will be changed in an hour. You have 30 minutes to pack. The morning sun reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, casting sharp geometric shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. For a decade, I had started my mornings in a fabricated reality, wearing itchy polyester blends, carrying a chipped thermos, and driving through gridlocked traffic to a mid-level insurance firm. Today, however, there was no costume. I wore a tailored midnight blue suit that cost more than Jason's annual car lease. I stood at the head of the executive boardroom on the 50th floor of the Vanguard Zenith Tower, looking out over the sprawling city skyline that I effectively owned. My board of directors sat around the table, a collection of the sharpest financial minds on the eastern seaboard, waiting for my morning briefing. The air in the room was charged with focused energy. We were finalizing the quarterly acquisitions, and my portfolio managers were eagerly presenting their target lists. The events of the previous evening felt like a distant, satisfying memory. I had watched Jason drag 2 overstuffed suitcases down the driveway of my estate, while Barbara and Isabella followed behind him in a state of absolute hysterical shock. I had slept better than I had in 7 years. My chief operating officer, Marcus, was midway through a presentation on a struggling tech sector buyout when the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open with a violent crash. The thick tempered glass hit the rubber doorstop so hard the entire wall vibrated. Marcus stopped speaking instantly. My entire board of directors turned in their leather chairs, their expressions shifting from professional focus to absolute bewilderment. Standing in the doorway, red-faced and breathing heavily, was my father. William wore his bespoke charcoal suit like a suit of armor, his chest puffed out, his jaw clenched in a tight line of pure, unadulterated fury. He had clearly bypassed the ground floor security desk by sheer force of his arrogant personality, likely flashing his own CEO credentials and barking orders until a terrified intern swiped him through the elevator turnstiles. 2 breathless security guards were hovering right behind him in the hallway, looking utterly panicked. William did not immediately comprehend the environment he had just stormed into. His eyes were entirely focused on hunting down his disobedient daughter. He marched into the room, his expensive leather shoes slamming against the hardwood floor. "Where is the branch manager?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the acoustic panels. "I demand to speak to the senior partner in charge of this division immediately." He was so blinded by his own manufactured rage that he did not even look at the faces of the people sitting around the table. He assumed he had walked into a generic middle management conference room. He assumed I was just a lowly actuary sitting quietly in a corner seat waiting to be reprimanded. He marched straight toward Marcus, mistaking my 50-year-old chief operating officer for the man in charge. "My daughter works in this department," William demanded, pointing a rigid finger at Marcus. "Her name is Fiona. She is an actuary here, and her behavior over the past 12 hours has been absolutely psychotic. I am William Sterling, CEO of Sterling Manufacturing, and I want her terminated. She has suffered a complete mental breakdown. She is illegally tampering with her husband's business accounts, and she is an active liability to your firm. If you do not pack up her desk and have her escorted out of this building in the next 5 minutes, I will personally see to it that your corporate contracts are audited and terminated." Marcus looked at William, then slowly turned his head to look at me. The rest of the board members exchanged highly amused, silent glances. They knew exactly who William Sterling was. We had been discussing his failing manufacturing plant for the better part of 6 months. I stood perfectly still at the head of the table. I did not shrink down. I did not lower my eyes. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany surface and cleared my throat. The soft sound commanded instant absolute silence in the room. William finally turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, his brain struggled to process the visual information. He was looking for the mousy, submissive woman in the beige cardigan. Instead, he saw a predator dressed in thousands of dollars of custom tailoring standing at the absolute center of power in a room that screamed unimaginable wealth. He looked at the massive Vanguard Zenith logo etched into the frosted glass wall behind me. He looked at the silent, incredibly powerful executives who were all deferring to my presence. The color drained out of his face, leaving a sickly, mottled gray in its wake. "Fiona," he said, his voice dropping an octave as confusion temporarily overrode his anger. "What are you doing in here? Where is your desk?" "I am exactly where I belong, William," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I do not have a desk. I have a boardroom. I suggest you tell your security detail to wait outside." I gave a brief nod to the 2 guards lingering in the hallway. They immediately stepped back and let the heavy glass doors slide shut, sealing us inside the soundproof room. William was trapped in the lion's den, but his immense ego simply refused to allow him to back down. The confusion vanished, replaced by a renewed, desperate aggression. He took another step forward, trying to physically loom over the long table. "I do not care what kind of charade you are pulling here," he snarled, planting his hands on the back of an empty leather chair. Jason arrived at my house at 3 in the morning. He was completely devastated. "He told me you locked him out of his own home. He told me you somehow hacked into his corporate accounts and fabricated a fake dissolution notice. Do you have any idea the kind of panic you have caused? Your mother is inconsolable. Isabella is practically sedated. You are going to fix this right now." I remained entirely impassive. "You are mistaken, William. I did not hack anything. I legally liquidated a subsidiary company that I own because the acting manager was caught attempting to embezzle $250,000 to fund his mistress. Jason is not a victim. He is an unemployed fraud." William slammed his fist down on the back of the chair. "He is your husband. He is family. And you are deliberately trying to destroy him out of some twisted sense of petty jealousy. You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always been bitter that you were not the favorite. So you concoct this insane, illegal scheme to ruin her hotel launch and bankrupt your own husband just to get back at us." He was projecting his own toxic family dynamics onto my business decisions. He truly believed that my entire financial empire was just a tool I created to throw a temper tantrum. He looked around at my silent board of directors, attempting to rally them to his side. "Listen to me," William shouted to the room at large. "This woman is deeply unwell. She needs psychiatric intervention. If she has somehow managed to secure a position of authority in this company, you need to remove her immediately. She is unstable. She is acting out of pure malicious spite. I will call the medical board myself. I will have her committed. I will drag her name and this firm's name through the mud of every financial publication on the East Coast if you do not stop her. I let him rant. I let him expose his true venomous nature in front of the people who helped me run my empire. My executives did not flinch. They simply watched the man dig his own grave with a mixture of professional curiosity and profound disgust. They knew the numbers. They knew the legal standing. They knew exactly how completely ruined Jason was, and they were about to find out exactly how ruined William was. When William finally ran out of breath, his chest heaving as he glared at me with absolute hatred, I gave a subtle wave of my hand. "Marcus," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Please clear the room. The board is dismissed for the morning. We will reconvene at noon to finalize the tech acquisitions." My executives stood up in perfect synchronization. They gathered their tablets and files, moving toward the door without a single word of protest. They walked past William as if he were nothing more than a piece of broken furniture. Within 30 seconds, the massive boardroom was completely empty, leaving only my father and me standing on opposite ends of the mahogany table. William sneered at me, clearly mistaking my dismissal of the board as a sign of weakness. He thought I was clearing the room to surrender in private. "You see," he taunted, leaning heavily against the table. "You cannot handle the pressure when real adults enter the room. Your little power trip is over, Fiona. You are going to transfer the funds back to Jason's account. You are going to sign the paperwork protecting his assets. And then you are going to check yourself into the facility your mother and I have already selected for you." He reached inside his suit jacket, preparing to pull out the very same fraudulent psychiatric affidavits Jason had bragged about the night before. He was entirely predictable. He operated on brute force and intimidation, assuming everyone would eventually bow to his authority. He had no concept of strategy. He had no idea he had just walked willingly into a minefield I had laid for him months ago. His manufacturing plant, which he loved more than his own daughters, had missed 3 consecutive production targets. I knew he was bleeding capital to maintain his pristine country club lifestyle, desperately moving money around to cover his massive shortfalls. He was in technical default on Section 4 of his loan covenants, and he was terrified of the impending consequences. I had already triggered the acceleration clause. The full balance was due in exactly 14 days, or I was legally seizing the property, liquidating the heavy machinery, and firing every single one of his overpaid, underperforming executives. The air in the room seemed to vanish. William staggered backward, clutching his chest, as the reality of his total destruction took hold. He was no longer the untouchable patriarch dictating terms to his family. He was just a failing, bankrupt businessman standing in his daughter's boardroom. I watched him desperately try to catch his breath, his eyes darting frantically around the room for an escape route that did not exist. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply reached out and rested my index finger on the speakerphone button of my sleek desk console. I pressed it down. A crisp dial tone filled the silent room. "Dad, before you threaten me, you might want to call your bank. Vanguard Zenith just bought the commercial loan on your manufacturing plant. You don't own your company anymore. I do." William stared at the blinking light on my desk console as if it were a venomous snake. The air rushed out of his lungs in a single ragged exhale. He did not yell. He did not scream. The absolute reality of his financial ruin crushed the fight right out of him. He looked at me, his eyes wide and hollow, searching for the submissive daughter he had bullied for 3 decades. He found nothing but a reflection of his own ruthless corporate tactics staring back at him. Without another word, he turned and stumbled out of my boardroom, his shoulders slumped, looking like an old defeated man. I did not waste a single second relishing the victory. I checked the platinum watch on my wrist. It was 11:30. My morning was far from over. I picked up my briefcase, straightened my jacket, and walked to the private elevator. My driver was already waiting at the curb to take me to the Oakmont Country Club. The Oakmont was the glittering crown jewel of the city's elite. It was a sprawling estate of manicured golf courses, tennis courts, and grand dining halls that required a six-figure initiation fee just to walk through the front doors. More importantly, it was the absolute center of my mother's universe. Barbara drew her entire sense of self-worth from her status within those walls. She was the reigning queen of the social committee, a woman who wielded gossip and exclusivity like a medieval monarch. Today, she was hosting the highly anticipated spring charity luncheon in the grand ballroom surrounded by 50 of the wealthiest, most influential women in the state. I arrived at the club just as the main course was being served. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom were propped open, allowing the gentle hum of classical music and the clinking of crystal to drift into the marble foyer. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. Barbara was holding court at the center table, seated beneath a massive crystal chandelier. She wore a pristine white designer suit, a string of flawless pearls resting against her collarbone. Isabella sat faithfully at her right side, nodding along with a look of manufactured sorrow on her face. I could hear my mother's voice ringing clearly over the polite chatter of the room. She was putting on an absolute masterclass in character assassination. It is a complete psychological collapse. Barbara sighed loudly, ensuring her tragic tone reached the neighboring tables. We are entirely heartbroken. She completely lost touch with reality last night. She threw poor Jason out onto the street with nothing but a suitcase. The poor boy was in tears. He has been working so incredibly hard to build his consulting business and support her, and she just snapped. She locked him out of his own home. A chorus of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the socialites. Mrs. Harrington, a woman whose husband owned half the car dealerships in the county, leaned in closer. That is terribly sad, Barbara. But Fiona always was a bit high-strung, was she not? Always so quiet and resentful. Isabella let out a delicate, practiced sigh. She has always been jealous of me, Isabella murmured, placing a comforting hand over our mother's arm. It has eaten away at her for years. We think the pressure of a normal, healthy marriage was just too much for her to handle. Jason is an absolute saint for putting up with her coldness for so long. We are looking into long-term psychiatric care facilities for her today. I decided they had enjoyed enough airtime. I stepped confidently into the ballroom, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The sound cut through the classical music. One by one, the wealthy socialites turned their heads toward the entrance. The polite chatter died down instantly, replaced by a sudden heavy silence that suffocated the massive room. Barbara froze, her mimosa glass halting halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as she took in my appearance. I was not wearing the drab, oversized clothes she was accustomed to seeing me in. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored midnight blue suit that radiated wealth and authority. Fiona Barbara snapped, her shock quickly morphing into furious indignation. What on earth are you doing here? You are not a member of this club. I walked slowly toward her table, acutely aware of 50 pairs of eyes tracking my every movement. I am just here to clear up a few misconceptions, Mother, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. It sounded like you were struggling to tell the truth, so I thought I would offer my assistance. Isabella shrank back in her chair, her face draining of color. She remembered the corporate dissolution notice from the night before. She knew exactly what I was capable of. Barbara, however, was too arrogant and too deeply entrenched in her own social performance to back down in front of her friends. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, playing the role of the terrified, victimized mother to absolute perfection. Look at her, Barbara announced to the gaping audience of socialites. This is exactly what I was talking about. She is unwell. She is stalking us now. We have been trying to get her medical help, but she refuses to listen to reason. I stopped a few feet away from her table, clasping my hands lightly in front of me. I am perfectly sane, Barbara. I am just no longer willing to fund the lives of the people who despise me. Jason is not a tragic victim. He is a fraud who tried to embezzle my money to fund his affair with Isabella. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Several women covered their mouths in shock. Isabella looked like she was going to slide under the table and disappear. How dare you! Barbara shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of crimson. Her carefully crafted facade was shattering in front of the very people she sought to impress. She turned frantically toward the back of the room. Mr. Caldwell! Mr. Caldwell, get out here immediately! The club manager, a nervous, balding man in a tight tuxedo, hurried over from the serving station. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, looking completely terrified by the scene unfolding in his dining room. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, how can I assist you? I want this woman removed from the premises immediately, Barbara demanded, her voice shrill and echoing. My daughter is unwell. She is causing a disturbance. She does not belong here, and she certainly does not have the funds to be on these premises. Call security and have her thrown out. Mr. Caldwell turned to me, wringing his hands together. He offered a weak, apologetic smile. Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private event for members only. I did not break eye contact with my mother as I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket. I know this is a private club, Mr. Caldwell, I said smoothly. And I also know exactly how this club has been managed for the past 5 years. I pulled out a thick legal envelope and turned to face the manager. I handed it to him. He took it hesitantly, his hands shaking slightly. Open it, I instructed. Mr. Caldwell opened the flap and pulled out the documents inside. On top of the stack was a certified bank draft. I watched his eyes widen to the size of saucers as he read the string of zeros printed across the paper. What is this? He stammered, looking up at me in absolute shock. That is a certified bank draft for $12.4 million, I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the furthest corners of the quiet ballroom. It covers the entirety of the Oakmont Country Club's severely delinquent property taxes, the outstanding vendor debts you have been hiding from the membership, and the massive penalty fees the city was preparing to levy against this property by Friday. The socialites began to murmur frantically. They had absolutely no idea the club was in financial peril. Barbara stared at me, completely bewildered, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. As you know, Mr. Caldwell, I continued, pacing slowly in front of the table. The club's bylaws contain a specific emergency buyout clause. In the event of imminent municipal foreclosure, any entity willing to assume and clear the total debt burden is granted immediate transfer of majority equity and controlling interest of the club. My firm, Vanguard Zenith, acquired your debt portfolio yesterday. That draft clears the ledger. Mr. Caldwell flipped frantically through the supporting legal documents attached to the check. He saw the signatures, the municipal stamps, and the undeniable legal transfer of ownership. He looked up at me, his posture instantly shifting from nervous authority to absolute subservient deference. The documentation is fully verified. Miss Sterling, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice trembling with a mixture of relief and awe. I turned back to Barbara. She looked as though she had been struck by lightning. The arrogant sneer was completely gone, replaced by a look of profound, devastating horror. She finally realized the magnitude of what was happening. The daughter she had constantly belittled was not just a secret corporate titan. I was the architect of their total social and financial destruction. You see, Mother, I said, taking a deliberate step closer to her table. You spent my entire life telling me I was too small, too boring, and too incompetent to fit into your grand elite world. You thought you could conspire with my cheating husband to steal my house and lock me in a psychiatric ward just to protect your reputation. You thought you held all the cards. I leaned in, resting my hands on the pristine white tablecloth. But you forgot one crucial detail. I am an actuary. I calculate risk. I assess value. And I know exactly how to dismantle a failing enterprise. Jason's firm is gone. Dad's manufacturing plant belongs to me. And now the very ground you are standing on is my personal property. Barbara stumbled backward, bumping into her chair. Her hands shook violently. You cannot do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. This is my club. My friends are here. You cannot do this to me. I stood up straight, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket with total calm. I looked out over the sea of 50 gaping socialites, all watching the spectacular downfall of their queen bee. As the new owner, I'm revoking your membership, Barbara. Security will escort you to the parking lot. Two burly security guards in dark suits stepped forward, their faces entirely devoid of sympathy. They flanked my mother gently but firmly, grasping her elbows. Barbara let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her hands flying to her pearls, as if to protect them from the sudden indignity of physical removal. She looked back at her circle of friends, her eyes silently begging for an intervention, for someone to stand up and challenge my authority. 50 of the city's most influential women simply stared back, their expressions a mixture of morbid fascination and self-preservation. Nobody moved a muscle. They all recognized a shift in power when they saw one. Barbara was unceremoniously marched out of the grand ballroom, her designer heels dragging against the polished hardwood floor. Her reign as the social queen of the Oakmont Country Club extinguished in a matter of seconds. I turned to Mr. Caldwell, who was still clutching the certified bank draft as if it were a holy relic. I instructed him to have my office contacted regarding the immediate restructuring of the board. Then I walked out the front doors and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. The satisfying crunch of my mother's shattered ego was merely the appetizer for the day. The main course was scheduled for 8 o'clock that evening. The grand opening of the Azure Isabella's luxury boutique hotel was a masterclass in desperate, unfunded extravagance. Located in the heart of the historic district, the renovated six-story building was draped in cascading silk banners and bathed in the harsh glare of rented spotlight beams sweeping across the night sky. A velvet red carpet stretched from the curb to the gilded brass entrance doors, flanked by velvet ropes, and a small army of local press photographers my sister had undoubtedly bribed to attend. I stepped out of my town car and smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal coat. The chaotic energy of the event hit me immediately. Valets scrambled to park a parade of leased luxury vehicles, while waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated through the outdoor courtyard, carrying trays of imported champagne. It was a beautiful illusion, a hollow shell of success built entirely on deferred payments, predatory interest rates, and the desperate hope of a bridge loan that Isabella was banking her entire future on. I walked slowly down the red carpet, my gaze sweeping over the elaborate floral arrangements that I knew she had not paid for. I saw local politicians, minor celebrities, and the city's social elite mingling near the entrance, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath their feet was a financial sinkhole. And there, standing at the apex of the red carpet, was Isabella. She wore a backless emerald gown that clung to her frame, her hair styled in elaborate waves, a diamond necklace sparkling brightly against her skin. She was holding court, laughing loudly and tossing her head back for the cameras, playing the role of the triumphant self-made entrepreneur. The moment she spotted me walking up the velvet walkway, her manufactured laughter died in her throat. The glittering facade dropped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked, calculating woman underneath, before she quickly reconstructed her arrogant sneer. She whispered something to the society reporter she was speaking with, excused herself, and marched directly toward me, her emerald gown swishing furiously around her ankles. She positioned herself squarely in my path, effectively blocking my access to the main entrance doors, ensuring that the flashing cameras and the lingering journalists were well within earshot. "What are you doing here, Fiona?" Isabella hissed, keeping her voice low, but entirely lethal. "You were explicitly left off the guest list. This is an exclusive launch for investors and high society, not a pity party for a penniless, bitter ex-wife who just lost her husband." I stopped a few feet away from her, completely unfazed by her venom. She was attempting to establish dominance in front of the press, assuming I would shrink away in humiliation. She was still operating under the delusion that the narrative she and Jason had carefully constructed was actually working. "I am not here to drink your unpaid champagne, Isabella," I replied, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the crowd. "I am here in a professional capacity to deliver some rather pressing documentation regarding your property." Isabella let out a harsh, condescending laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder for the benefit of the nearby photographers. "Professional capacity," she repeated loudly, ensuring the closest reporter caught the words. "Oh, please, Jason told me everything. You are unemployed, Fiona. You are sitting in an empty, locked house having a nervous breakdown while Jason is out trying to salvage his career from your hysterical sabotage. I honestly feel sorry for you. I really do. But you cannot come to my hotel opening and try to ruin my night just because your own life is a complete and utter failure. Security will be here in a moment to escort you back to reality. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not defend my mental state. Arguing with a narcissist in front of an audience was a waste of perfectly good oxygen. Instead, I calmly reached into the leather briefcase I carried at my side. I withdrew a thick sealed manila envelope and held it out toward her. Isabella stared at the envelope as if it were coated in poison. She refused to take it, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. I suggest you open it, Isabella, I said, keeping the envelope suspended in the space between us. It is from the City Zoning Commission. My firm Vanguard Zenith was recently contracted to audit municipal commercial properties for compliance. It seems your contractors took quite a few devastating shortcuts when renovating this historic building. Her eyes darted nervously toward the envelope, a flicker of genuine fear finally breaking through her arrogant mask. What are you talking about? She snapped, her voice losing its theatrical projection. My contractors are top of the line. We passed all our initial inspections. You bribed a junior inspector to sign off on the drywall, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a clinical, detached level. But you failed to update the foundational load-bearing beams in the basement, and you completely bypassed the commercial fire suppression mandates for the upper 3 floors. The documents in this envelope detail 27 severe structural code violations. Effective at midnight tonight, the city is officially revoking your certificate of occupancy. Your hotel is a condemned fire hazard, Isabella. You cannot legally host a single guest in this building. Isabella snatched the envelope from my hand, her manicured fingers tearing violently at the heavy paper flap. She yanked out the stack of municipal documents, her eyes frantically scanning the bold red lettering, the official city seals, and the itemized list of catastrophic structural failures. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling beneath the glare of the red carpet spotlights. "This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice shaking as she clutched the papers to her chest. "This is just a bureaucratic mix-up. You are trying to scare me, Fiona. You are just trying to ruin my opening night with fake paperwork." "It is entirely real," I assured her. "And the fines associated with these violations currently exceed $400,000 payable immediately to the city planning office. If you do not pay, they seize the property." Isabella stared at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a sudden, desperate panic. But then, almost miraculously, she let out a loud, breathless laugh. It was a frantic, unhinged sound that drew the attention of several guests walking past us. She shook her head, clutching the citation papers tightly. "You think this matters?" she scoffed, waving the documents in my face. "You think a few ridiculous municipal fines are going to stop me? You really have no idea how high-level business operates, Fiona. I do not care about a $400,000 penalty. My primary investor is arriving tonight. He is bringing a massive bridge loan that will cover my entire operating budget for the next 3 years. He will pay these fines out of petty cash. He will hire a new contractor by morning, and this entire problem will vanish. You cannot touch me. I have backing you cannot even comprehend." She looked past me, scanning the crowd of luxury vehicles pulling up to the valet stand, desperately searching for her financial savior. She was completely oblivious to the man in the sharp gray suit who had quietly stepped out from the crowd of mingling VIP guests just a few yards away. He was a tall, distinguished man holding a microphone connected to the hotel's outdoor public address system. He had been designated to announce the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He walked purposefully down the red carpet, bypassing Isabella entirely. He stepped up to my side and offered a polite, deferential bow. He did not hand the microphone to my sister. He held it out directly to me. Isabella stopped laughing. Her mouth fell open in absolute confusion as she looked from the man in the gray suit to the microphone now resting securely in my hand. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," I said, acknowledging my lead asset manager. "Isabella," I said, lifting the microphone, so my voice echoed clearly through the massive outdoor speakers rolling over the heads of the press and the socialites. I am your primary investor, and your bridge loan is denied. The silence that fell over the red carpet was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic natural disaster. The only sound cutting through the crisp night air was the rapid mechanical clicking of camera shutters as 50 local press photographers simultaneously realized they were witnessing the greatest social and financial implosion of the decade. I held the microphone perfectly steady in my hand, letting my words hang in the space between us. Isabella stared at me, her vibrant emerald gown suddenly looking less like a symbol of triumph and more like a garish costume for a play that had just been cancelled. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. She shook her head, taking a hesitant step backward, the sharp heel of her designer shoe catching on the plush red fabric beneath her feet. "You are lying!" Isabella gasped, her voice entirely stripped of its former arrogant projection. "You have nothing to do with my hotel. My financing was secured through Horizon Trust. They are a massive international conglomerate. You are just trying to create a scandal to ruin my press coverage." I offered her a cold, pitying smile. "You really should have paid closer attention to the corporate structuring of your financial backers." "Isabella," I said, my voice projecting with crystal clarity through the towering outdoor speakers. "Horizon Trust is a blind subsidiary. It is a minor wholly owned branch of Vanguard Zenith. I am the founder, the chief executive officer, and the sole majority shareholder of Vanguard Zenith. Therefore, I am the singular source of your funding. Every single dollar you have recklessly spent on this ridiculous, flashy spectacle came directly from my corporate accounts." A collective murmur of shock rippled through the crowd of wealthy socialites, politicians, and minor celebrities who had gathered for the grand opening. They began to exchange nervous glances, realizing the extravagant party they were attending was rapidly transforming into a crime scene. "And because I am your primary investor," I continued, pacing slowly across the width of the red carpet, "I also hold the exclusive legal right to audit your operational ledgers at any time. It is an audit you failed spectacularly. You assumed Horizon Trust was simply a faceless conglomerate, willing to overlook minor discrepancies for a slice of the luxury market. You thought you could outsmart the market by redirecting essential construction capital to fund your personal lavish lifestyle." I turned slightly, addressing the crowd and the flashing cameras directly. "My sister has deliberately and maliciously misled her secondary investors. She embezzled millions of dollars to purchase imported Italian marble crystal chandeliers and custom designer furniture, while actively ignoring critical structural and fire safety codes. The documents she is holding are not a mere warning. They are an official condemnation from the City Zoning Commission." Isabella looked down at the manila envelope she was crushing against her chest as if it had suddenly caught fire. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. "Due to gross negligence, severe breach of fiduciary duty, and active endangerment of public safety, Vanguard Zenith is officially triggering the immediate default clause on your primary $50 million bridge loan." I announced, the finality of the statement ringing out like a gavel strike. I gestured to the distinguished man in the gray suit standing faithfully at my side. "Mr. Sterling here is not just my lead asset manager. He is accompanied by municipal authorities who are currently cordoning off the rear exits and securing the perimeter. This grand opening is officially cancelled. This is a foreclosure event. The property is seized. The operational assets are frozen. This building now belongs entirely to Vanguard Zenith, and absolutely no one is permitted inside." The reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. The waitstaff, realizing they were likely not going to be paid for their evening, immediately stopped serving. Trays of expensive imported champagne were set down on decorative tables and abandoned. The hired classical musicians packed up their instruments with hurried, panicked movements. The wealthy guests, desperate to distance themselves from a highly public financial scandal, began backing away from the entrance, signaling frantically for the valets to retrieve their cars. Isabella's knees buckled. Her legs simply gave out beneath her. She dropped heavily onto the velvet red carpet, the expensive silk of her emerald gown pooling around her in a tragic, messy heap. The manila envelope slipped from her trembling fingers. The thick stack of municipal citations and foreclosure notices scattered across the red carpet, the bold red lettering exposed to the relentless flashing of the press cameras. She pressed her hands to her face, a strangled, high-pitched sob tearing from her throat. From the edge of the fleeing crowd, Jason pushed his way forward. He had arrived late, looking disheveled and frantic. He had been locked out of my estate, fired from his own failing consulting firm, and stripped of all his corporate assets just hours prior. He had come to the hotel launch, carrying the desperate, pathetic hope of finding refuge in Isabella's supposed success. He had undoubtedly planned to stand by her side, ride the coattails of her luxury hotel, and cling to the illusion of wealth and status they had both desperately craved. Isabella looked up through her tear-streaked makeup and saw him standing near the velvet ropes. Her eyes widened with a sudden desperate surge of hope. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, uncaring about the cameras documenting her complete loss of dignity. She reached out and grabbed the fabric of Jason's tailored trousers, clinging to him like a drowning woman finding a piece of driftwood in the open ocean. "Jason," she begged, her voice a hysterical broken wail. "Jason, you have to do something. Please, you have to help me. Tell them they cannot do this. Use your firm. Call your corporate lawyers. We can fight her. We can stop the foreclosure. You have the money. You have to save the hotel." Jason froze. He stood perfectly rigid under the harsh glare of the spotlights. He looked down at the weeping, ruined woman clinging to his legs. He looked up at the municipal agents placing padlocks on the brass entrance doors. He looked at the press photographers capturing every agonizing second of the disaster. Finally, his eyes locked onto mine. I stood silently, my expression entirely devoid of emotion. I watched the internal calculations turning in his head. Jason had spent his entire adult life acting as a parasite, constantly attaching himself to the highest bidder. He had married me because I presented a reliable, quiet source of stability. He had slept with my sister because she presented an exciting illusion of glamorous, elite wealth. Now, staring at the catastrophic reality of her exposed fraud and public humiliation, his self-serving survival instincts took over completely. He knew his consulting firm was dead. He knew his bank accounts were frozen. He knew that being publicly associated with Isabella's criminal embezzlement right now would be an absolute death sentence for whatever pathetic remnants of a life he hoped to salvage. He did not see a partner kneeling on the red carpet. He saw a sinking ship, and he refused to be pulled under the water. Jason forcibly ripped his leg out of Isabella's grasp. The sudden violence of the movement caused her to fall forward, her hands scraping against the rough pavement beneath the red carpet. He took 2 large, deliberate steps backward, putting as much physical distance between them as possible. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Isabella," Jason said, his voice loud, clear, and specifically projected for the benefit of the surrounding journalists. "I have zero involvement in your fraudulent business practices. We were barely acquaintances. Do not drag me into your criminal mess." Isabella gasped, the sound tearing out of her lungs, as if she had been physically struck. She stared up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streaks. "Jason," she whispered, her voice cracking with profound betrayal. "You promised me. You said we were going to build an empire together." "You are crazy," Jason snapped, turning his back on her without a single ounce of hesitation. He looked directly at the nearest camera lens. "I am a respectable businessman. I have nothing to do with this woman." He shoved his way back through the dwindling crowd of spectators, lowering his head and disappearing into the shadows of the city street. He completely disavowed her, abandoning her to face the legal and social ruin entirely alone. Isabella let out a guttural, agonizing scream, burying her face in her hands as she wept on the ground. The cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the ultimate destruction of the golden child. I turned to Mr. Sterling, handing him the microphone. "Ensure the municipal agents secure all financial records in the back offices," I instructed quietly. "I want a full accounting of every stolen asset by Monday morning." Mr. Sterling bowed his head respectfully. "Consider it done, Ms. Sterling." I turned my back on the chaotic scene. The remaining crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path for me to walk through. I moved with purposeful strides, leaving the flashing lights and the sound of my sister's sobbing behind me. I approached my waiting town car. The driver quickly opened the heavy armored door. I slid into the spacious back seat, the thick glass instantly sealing out the noise of the ruined grand opening. The interior of the car was cool dark and perfectly silent. I leaned my head back against the premium leather headrest, closing my eyes and allowing myself a brief moment to exhale. The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. My personal cell phone began to vibrate violently inside the pocket of my coat. I pulled the device out and glanced at the illuminated screen. The caller ID displayed my father's name, William. I stared at the name for a moment. He had fled my corporate boardroom hours ago, broken and defeated by the revelation that I owned his manufacturing plant. Calling me now meant he had spent the afternoon frantically searching for a way to strike back. I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear, remaining perfectly silent. "You think you have won, Fiona," William snarled through the speaker. His voice was no longer the arrogant, booming roar of a CEO. It was a vicious, ragged hiss dripping with absolute poisonous malice. "You think taking my factory and ruining your mother's country club makes you untouchable? You think humiliating your sister makes you a god?" I listened to his heavy, labored breathing on the other end of the line. I did not offer a single word of confirmation or denial. "I have a nuclear option," William continued, the desperation in his tone bleeding through the anger. "You thought you were so clever hiding your little corporate empire, but you are not as smart as you think. I know the secret you buried 5 years ago. I know exactly what you did to secure the starting capital for Vanguard Zenith." My grip on the phone tightened incrementally, but I kept my breathing even and steady. "If you do not reverse every single action you took today," William threatened, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If you do not return my manufacturing plant, restore your mother's social standing, and back off your sister's hotel by Friday afternoon, I will completely destroy you. I will take this information directly to the federal authorities, and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal prison." I disconnected the call without uttering a single syllable in response. I did not panic. I did not scramble to contact my legal team. I simply pressed the intercom button on my polished desk console and instructed my ground floor security director to expect my parents at exactly noon on Friday. I told him to grant them unrestricted access to the executive elevator. I wanted them to walk willingly into the final trap. Friday arrived with a torrential downpour that battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The gray, stormy light cast long shadows across the imported leather furniture and the expansive mahogany desk that dominated the room. At precisely noon, the heavy glass doors swung open. William and Barbara marched inside. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. The events of the past 48 hours had visibly aged them. Barbara was not wearing her customary bright designer colors. She wore a dark, severe trench coat, her face pulled tight with suppressed rage, and the lingering humiliation of being physically escorted out of her beloved country club. William looked frantic. The polished, untouchable corporate patriarch was gone. His tie was slightly crooked, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles visibly ticked under his skin. He did not bother with a greeting. He crossed the expansive room in heavy, aggressive strides, stopping right at the edge of my desk. He reached inside his coat pocket and withdrew a thick stack of medical files bound by a heavy rubber band. He slammed them down onto the mahogany surface with enough force to make my coffee cup rattle against its saucer. "There is your total destruction," William snarled, leaning heavily over the desk to loom over me. "Read it, Fiona. Go ahead and read exactly how this little charade of yours comes to a permanent end today." I did not touch the files. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic chair, steepling my fingers together. I recognized the letterhead instantly. It belonged to Dr. Eris Thorne, a private, highly expensive psychiatrist who specialized in providing extremely discreet, morally bankrupt diagnoses for wealthy families looking to handle inconvenient relatives. You are incredibly predictable, William, Bruce said softly. He sneered, tapping a rigid finger against the top folder. This is a comprehensive, fully certified medical dossier documenting your severe, untreated psychotic break. Dr. Thorne has detailed your paranoid delusions, your erratic behavior, and your complete detachment from reality. He has certified that you are an active danger to yourself and to the financial institutions you supposedly manage. Barbara stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her waist as she glared at me with absolute contempt. You forced our hand. Fiona, she snapped, her voice trembling with venom. We did not want to do this, but you left us no choice. You attacked your own family. You embarrassed me in front of the entire social committee. You ruined Isabella. You are deeply unwell, and it is our duty as your parents to ensure you are removed from society before you do any more damage. I looked at the forged documents, feeling a cold, familiar wave of disgust wash over me. This was not a new tactic. This was the exact same playbook they had used a decade ago. 10 years ago, my grandmother, the only person in this family who possessed an ounce of genuine kindness, passed away. She had seen right through William's greed and Barbara's vanity. She had left her entire estate, a trust worth nearly $7 million, entirely to me. She wanted me to have the independence and the security that my parents had always denied me. William had found out about the will 3 days before it was set to be executed. He was drowning in debt from a failed expansion project and desperately needed that capital. So he and Barbara hired Dr. Thorne. They fabricated a story about me having violent suicidal ideations. They had me involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric ward for 72 hours. I was locked in a sterile room, sedated and completely isolated, while William presented the forged medical records to the estate executors. He had me legally declared incompetent and unfit to manage my own affairs. He seized the entire $7 million trust, appointed himself as my permanent financial conservator, and bled my grandmother's estate dry to save his factory. By the time I was released from the facility, traumatized and entirely broken, the money was gone. They had stolen my future, and they had convinced the rest of the family that I was simply a fragile, unstable girl who needed to be handled with pity and caution. William smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression spreading across his face. You remember Dr. Thorne, do you not, Fiona? His diagnoses are ironclad. They hold up in federal court. And I happen to know exactly how Vanguard Zenith operates. I read your corporate bylaws. Your firm has a very strict morality and stability clause for its chief executive officer. If the board of directors discovers that their founder is clinically insane, you will be stripped of your voting rights, your equity, and your title by Monday morning. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the polished glass of my desk calendar. So here are my terms. You are going to sign the manufacturing plant back over to me immediately. You are going to pay the property taxes on the Oakmont Country Club and reinstate your mother's membership with a full public apology. And you are going to clear the municipal violations on Isabella's hotel and approve her bridge loan. If you refuse, I walk straight from this office to the headquarters of the Wall Street Journal. I will hand this medical file to their top investigative reporter. Your shareholders will panic, your stock will plummet, and you will lose everything. I sat in total silence, listening to the rain lashing against the windows. I did not scream. I did not launch into a defensive rage to prove my sanity. I simply looked at the man who had stolen my grandmother's legacy and thought he could break me twice using the exact same weapon. I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached inside and retrieved a single sleek silver flash drive. I placed it on the desk next to his fraudulent medical files. I placed my index finger on top of the drive and smoothly slid it across the mahogany surface until it came to a stop, mere inches from his hand. What is this? William demanded, eyeing the small piece of metal with sudden suspicion. That is a flawless, comprehensive 10-year forensic financial audit of Sterling Manufacturing, I replied, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. William stiffened. The triumphant smile vanished from his face instantly. You see, William, when I acquired the commercial debt on your factory, I also gained unrestricted legal access to your internal servers. My team of forensic accountants spent the entire weekend digging through the hidden directories your chief financial officer thought he had deleted. You are not just a terrible businessman. You are a prolific, sloppy criminal. Barbara glanced nervously at her husband, recognizing the sudden shift in his posture. William, what is she talking about? She asked, her voice wavering. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. The flash drive contains irrefutable proof of your offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. It details 10 years of systematic corporate tax evasion and fraudulent expense reporting. But that is not even the best part. The most fascinating documents on that drive detail exactly how you managed to keep your lifestyle afloat when your production numbers plummeted 3 years ago. William took a step backward, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. He knew exactly what I had found. You embezzled employee pension funds, I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the large room. You systematically drained the retirement accounts of the men and women who sweat on your factory floor for 12 hours a day. You stole the life savings of your own blue-collar workers to pay for Barbara's country club dues, to lease your imported luxury cars, and to illegally fund Isabella's fraudulent boutique hotel project. You committed massive federal financial crimes to maintain the illusion that you were still a king. Lies. William choked out, his voice a hoarse, desperate rasp. You manufactured those numbers. You are trying to bluff me. I am an actuary, William. I do not bluff. I deal in absolute verifiable data. The paper trail is perfectly clear, and the digital signatures belong entirely to you and your personal accountant. The federal government takes a very dim view of rich men who steal pensions from the working class. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk, mirroring the aggressive posture he had taken moments before. Here are my terms. If you walk out of this building and release those fake medical records to the press, this flash drive goes straight to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By sunset, federal agents will be raiding your offices. They will seize your home, freeze your personal accounts, and parade you out of your mansion in handcuffs while the local news helicopters circle overhead. You will not face a corporate boardroom vote. You will face 20 to 30 years in a federal penitentiary. The silence in the office was absolute. Barbara pressed her hand against her mouth, a stifled sob escaping her throat as she realized the true extent of their ruin. She looked at William, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to assure her that I was making it all up. But William could not look at her. He could only stare at the silver flash drive sitting on the edge of the desk like a loaded weapon. I watched his eyes dart back and forth between the medical files and the flash drive. I watched the profound, paralyzing fear wash over him. He was trapped. He knew the evidence was real, and he knew a federal indictment would utterly destroy the sterling name forever. But William had spent his entire life bullying his way out of corners. His arrogant narcissism simply could not process the concept of surrender, especially to the daughter he viewed as a subservient stepping stone. The fear in his eyes slowly hardened, replaced by a desperate, maniacal sneer. He reached out and grabbed the forged medical files, clutching them tightly in his hand. He looked at me, a twisted smirk forming on his lips. You are bluffing, he stated, his voice regaining a fraction of its former arrogant boom. You would not dare hand that over to the authorities. If I go to federal prison, the scandal ruins the entire family. It ruins your mother. It ruins your sister. It stains the sterling legacy permanently. He leaned over the desk, his eyes wild and utterly convinced of my inherent weakness. You wouldn't destroy your own family name. I looked at William, his smirk revealing his delusion. He believed the sterling name was a shield I would never tarnish. I am not destroying the family name, William, I replied. You did that yourself. Get out. He glared, clutching the forged records, then turned toward the door. Barbara followed closely. The heavy glass doors slid shut. I slipped the silver flash drive into my desk. He had no idea I had anticipated his every move. 48 hours later, the grand ballroom was overflowing with wealthy investors. This was the annual shareholder gala, where William presented a fabricated facade of corporate health to fund his enterprise. I arrived precisely at 8, bypassing the red carpet and slipping through a side entrance. I wore a black gown, my mind focused. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos. I stood near the back, observing the crowd. They found me quickly. William marched through the crowd with arrogant purpose. Flanking him was Jason. My ex-husband looked pathetic, his eyes darting around the room. Realizing Isabella was financially ruined, Jason had slithered back to William, begging for protection. They approached me with identical expressions of smug superiority. "You actually showed up!" Jason sneered, his voice laced with venom. "I told William you were too unstable to handle a public event. We gave you a chance to surrender your assets quietly, Fiona. Now you are going to be humiliated in front of the entire corporate board." William stepped closer. "I have the medical documents right here. When I take that stage tonight, I am going to announce your immediate medical leave of absence. I am going to tell this room that my daughter has suffered a mental breakdown. I am going to assume emergency conservatorship over Vanguard Zenith and liquidate everything you have built. You are finished." "You are welcome to try, William," I replied smoothly, "but I highly recommend you review your own corporate bylaws before you step onto that stage." William scoffed. "Watch and learn," Fiona William threw over his shoulder. "Watch how real power operates." I watched them take their places at the head table. The room quieted down as the lights dimmed. I moved silently toward the audio-visual control booth behind a heavy velvet curtain near the rear exit. The technician looked up in surprise, but I flashed my Vanguard Zenith security clearance badge. My firm had acquired the company managing the hotel's technology infrastructure. I instructed the technician to step aside. I connected an encrypted tablet to the main mixing console, queuing up the digital audio file I had held for weeks. At the front of the room, William stepped up to the clear podium. He tapped the microphone, demanding absolute silence. "Good evening," William began, his voice booming. "We are gathered here to celebrate another year of innovation at Sterling Manufacturing. But before we discuss projections, I must address a deeply painful matter regarding my family." A hush fell over the crowd. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting to serious concern. Jason sat at the head table, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the tragic son-in-law to perfection. "Many of you know my eldest daughter, Fiona," William continued, his tone dripping with manufactured sorrow. "It breaks my heart to announce this, but Fiona has recently suffered a catastrophic psychological collapse. She is experiencing dangerous paranoid delusions and is entirely unfit to manage her affairs. Therefore, as her father and legal conservator, I am officially announcing her indefinite medical leave of absence. Effective immediately, I will be assuming emergency control over all her corporate holdings to ensure they are protected during her recovery." He paused, letting his lie settle. He looked out into the darkness, searching for my face, eager to witness my destruction. I did not give him the satisfaction. I pressed the transmission button on my tablet. I completely bypassed the hotel's projector system. I did not play a video or display a spreadsheet. I simply overrode the master audio feed, routing the crystal-clear recording directly through the ballroom's massive surround sound speakers. William opened his mouth to continue his speech, but his microphone was entirely dead. Instead, a different voice filled the room. It was Jason's loud voice, echoing perfectly clear from the recording I had taken while hiding in the dark coat closet of our home weeks ago. "I cannot stand touching her anymore," Jason's recorded voice complained through the speakers. "Fiona is so cold, so boring. She has no idea what is actually going on. I am transferring the last of our joint savings into the offshore account tonight. Once the dissolution goes through, she will be left with absolutely nothing, and we can finally be together." The entire ballroom gasped. 500 wealthy investors, politicians, and corporate executives froze in their seats. Jason shot up from his chair at the head table, his face draining of color. He looked frantically at the ceiling speakers, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. Then Isabella's voice rang out sharp and demanding. "You better make sure the transfer is untraceable, Jason. Daddy said he needs that capital to cover the missing pension funds before the federal auditors catch on." A collective murmur of shock rippled through the audience. The senior board members sitting next to Jason physically recoiled, their eyes wide with disgust. William gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He frantically slapped the dead microphone, his face contorting into a mask of pure panic. Finally, William's recorded voice boomed through the ballroom, confirming his total guilt. "Do not worry about the auditors, Isabella," the recorded William stated. "I have been cooking the books at Sterling Manufacturing for a decade. The employee pension fund is entirely liquidated. I moved the cash through the Cayman accounts to keep your mother's country club memberships paid and to secure the down payment on your hotel. Once we have Fiona locked in the psychiatric ward and I seize her trust, we will backfill the accounts, and no one will ever know. She is too weak to fight us. The recording clicked off, leaving the ballroom in dead silence. The magnitude of the confession paralyzed the room. They had just heard their CEO explicitly admit to massive federal tax fraud, the embezzlement of employee pensions, and a malicious plot to falsely imprison his own daughter to steal her assets. The silence shattered into an uproar of furious shouting. Investors leapt to their feet, faces red with outrage. They pointed at William, yelling demands for answers. The facade of the Sterling Empire had completely detonated in front of the most powerful people in the state. Jason tried to back away from the head table, but two security guards blocked his path. At the center of the head table, the chairman of the board stood up. He was an imposing man with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He did not yell. He simply looked at William with an expression of profound disgust. The chairman reached over, grabbed William by the lapel of his tuxedo, and leaned in close. "You are a disgrace to this company, and a disgrace to your family," the chairman stated, his voice carrying clearly over the shouting crowd. "You are officially terminated, William. As of this exact second, you have no authority, no equity, and no protection. Security will hold you in the back room until the federal authorities arrive." William staggered backward, his legs giving out as the reality of his total destruction crashed down upon him. He was completely ruined. I stood quietly in the back of the room, watching the security guards march my father and my ex-husband out of the ballroom. I had won. But as I turned to walk out the exit, my cell phone vibrated sharply in my hand. I looked at the screen. It was William. He must have begged for one phone call before they took him away. I answered the call. "Fiona," William gasped, his voice trembling with a frantic, unhinged desperation. "I have a nuclear option. I have a secret that will destroy you if you do not give everything back by Friday." William's frantic voice faded from the phone speaker. I ended the call and slipped the device back into my coat pocket. The ballroom was in total upheaval, a chaotic swarm of furious investors and panicked executives. At the center of the storm, Jason stood paralyzed. He was desperately trying to blend into the velvet drapes near the exit, hoping the sheer magnitude of William's implosion would allow him to slip away unnoticed. He was severely mistaken. Two men in nondescript gray suits materialized from the fleeing crowd, blocking his path to the double mahogany doors. They did not look like security. They moved with the cold mechanical efficiency of process servers. I watched from the shadows of the audiovisual booth as one of the men stepped squarely into Jason's personal space and pressed a thick sealed blue folder directly into his chest. Jason fumbled his hands, instinctively closing around the heavy legal packet. The server spoke a few quiet, legally binding words, turned on his heel, and vanished back into the crowd. Jason tore open the flap, his manicured fingers trembling violently. He pulled out the final dissolution decree of our marriage. The documents were fully executed, signed by a federal judge just 2 hours prior, rendering our separation absolute and irrevocable. But it was not the end of the marriage that drained the last remaining drops of color from his face. It was the itemized financial ledger attached to the back of the decree. Jason had spent the last 3 years secretly funneling his consulting firm's capital into highly leveraged, high-risk offshore ventures, assuming my pristine credit and immense hidden wealth would act as his permanent safety net. He believed that even in divorce our assets would be pooled, forcing me to absorb his catastrophic losses. My attorneys, however, had spent months meticulously severing my financial identity from his toxic shell companies. The decree he held in his shaking hands legally isolated every single cent of his debt, assigning the full crushing weight of $14 million in defaulted loans entirely to him. I watched his knees physically buckle. He grabbed the edge of a cocktail table to keep from collapsing onto the carpet. His consulting firm was liquidated. His reputation was utterly destroyed by the audio recording, and now he was legally bound to a mountain of debt he could not pay off in 10 lifetimes. He was facing immediate, inescapable bankruptcy. He shoved the papers into his jacket pocket and stumbled out of the ballroom, bursting through the double doors into the grand lobby. I followed at a measured, deliberate pace, stepping out into the expansive marble foyer just in time to witness the final pathetic collapse of his alliance with my sister. Isabella was crumpled on a plush velvet settee near the coat check. Her emerald gown was stained with tears and champagne, her elaborate hairstyle ruined by her frantic hands. She had fled the hotel after her investors evaporated, desperately seeking shelter at William's gala, only to arrive exactly as our father's criminal empire detonated over the loudspeakers. She had absolutely nothing left. Her boutique hotel was foreclosed, her reputation was a punchline, and her primary source of funding was about to be federally indicted. As Jason staggered into the lobby, panting heavily, Isabella shot up from the settee. She ran toward him, her arms outstretched, her face a mask of smeared mascara and raw panic. "Jason," she cried out, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble walls. "Jason, what are we going to do?" The city locked the hotel doors. Vanguard Zenith seized the accounts. "You have to wire me the money from your firm. We have to run." Jason did not embrace her. He did not offer a word of comfort. He looked at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman whose manufactured glamour had seduced him into absolute ruin, and his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. He violently shoved her hands off his shoulders. "Get away from me, Isabella!" he snarled, his voice cracking with panic. "You did this. You and your corrupt father dragged me into this mess. You told me the hotel was a sure thing. You told me the pension money was untraceable. You ruined my life." Isabella stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "Jason, you promised me. You said you loved me. I do not care about you." Jason spat, stepping around her shivering form. "I never cared about you. You are a broke, delusional liability, and I am not going to federal prison for your family. Do not ever contact me again." He turned and sprinted toward the revolving glass doors, fleeing into the stormy night, leaving Isabella sobbing hysterically on the cold marble floor. I walked straight past her kneeling form. I did not pause. I did not look down. She was simply a ghost of a problem I had already solved. My focus shifted to the far end of the lobby, where William and Barbara were desperately attempting to escape out a side service exit. They were moving with frantic, jerky motions, terrified of the press that was undoubtedly gathering outside the main entrance. William was clutching his chest, his breath coming in short, harsh gasps, while Barbara tugged desperately at his sleeve, her face hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. They looked like common thieves fleeing a crime scene. I intercepted them just as William reached for the brass handle of the service door. "Going somewhere?" William, I asked, my voice slicing through the quiet space like a steel blade. William spun around his back, hitting the heavy metal door. Barbara let out a small, terrified shriek, shrinking behind his shoulder. "You!" William breathed, his eyes wide and feverish. "You engineered this entire nightmare. You set me up. You stole my factory. You ruined my reputation. And you humiliated us in front of the entire city." "I merely exposed the truth, William." I corrected him, stepping closer. "You spent a decade stealing from the people who trusted you. You built an empire on lies, and I simply turned on the lights. Your nuclear option was a pathetic bluff, and it failed." Barbara stepped out from behind his shoulder, her hands trembling violently. She pulled off her sunglasses, her eyes red and swollen. "Please, Fiona." Barbara wept, her voice entirely stripped of its usual commanding arrogance. "Please, I am begging you. You have taken everything. The country club, the factory, Isabella's hotel. We have absolutely no cash reserves. We are completely ruined. Just let us go home. Let us go back to the estate and figure out how to survive this. We will leave you alone. We will never bother you again. Just let us keep our home." I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the man who had stolen my grandmother's legacy and threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward to cover his own crimes. They wanted to retreat to their sprawling gated Connecticut mansion. They wanted to hide behind their high brick walls, lick their wounds, and pretend they still belonged to the elite class they so desperately worshipped. They thought their sanctuary was safe. They were wrong. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and withdrew a crisp folded legal document. The paper bore the heavy embossed seal of the county clerk's office. I held it out toward William. He stared at it, his hands shaking so violently he could barely raise his arm. "Take it, William," I commanded softly. "Read the final chapter." William snatched the paper from my hand. He unfolded it, his eyes darting across the dense legal text. As his brain processed the words printed on the page, his knees buckled. He sagged against the service door, letting out a hollow, agonizing groan. "What is it?" Barbara cried, grabbing his arm. "William, what does it say?" "You see, Barbara," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. William's offshore tax fraud was incredibly expensive to maintain. When the pension fund started running dry 6 months ago, he needed a massive injection of capital to keep the federal auditors at bay. He quietly leveraged your sprawling Connecticut mansion. He took out a massive high-interest secondary mortgage against the estate, assuming he could pay it back once Isabella's hotel launched and started generating revenue. But the hotel failed, and William defaulted on the mortgage payments 30 days ago. Barbara gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. "No," she whimpered. "No, that is our home." "It was your home, Barbara," I corrected her. When the bank issued the default notice, Vanguard Zenith stepped in and bought the paper. "I purchased the debt on your estate. I hold the deed. I am the sole legal owner of the property." The blood drained completely from Barbara's face. She collapsed against William, weeping uncontrollably into his shoulder. "I am giving you exactly 24 hours to pack your personal belongings," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the service corridor. "Tomorrow night at precisely 9 o'clock, my security team will arrive at the estate. The locks will be changed, the alarm codes will be reset, and the gates will be permanently sealed. If you are still on the premises, you will be arrested for trespassing." William looked up at me, tears of absolute defeat streaming down his aged face. He clenched his fists, his voice trembling with a mixture of hatred and total devastation. "You are a monster," he whispered. "You are a cold, heartless monster." I looked at the broken man who had tormented me for my entire existence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. "No," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. "I am just the boring actuary who finally balanced the books." I turned my back on my screaming family. The sound of Barbara's hysterical sobbing and William's hollow, defeated gasps faded into white noise as I walked away. I did not look back. I crossed the grand marble lobby, my footsteps echoing with a steady, rhythmic finality against the expensive floorboards. The polished surfaces mirrored my confident stride. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the venue and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. The brutal storm had finally broken, leaving behind a brilliantly clear, star-filled sky and the sharp, clean scent of rain washed pavement. The towering city lights glittered around me in the darkness, no longer a symbol of my permanent exclusion, but a shining reflection of my absolute, undeniable triumph. My sleek black town car was waiting patiently at the curb, the powerful engine purring softly in the quiet street. My driver immediately stepped out, holding open the heavy armored rear door with a deeply respectful nod. I slid into the luxurious, quiet interior of the vehicle, feeling the plush leather instantly conform to my back. As the door clicked shut, completely sealing out the pathetic remnants of my toxic family's shattered lives, I reached for the chilled silver ice bucket resting in the center console. I pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne, the dark frosted glass cool against my palm. I popped the cork with a soft, satisfying sigh and poured the effervescent golden liquid into a delicate crystal flute. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, bright flavor completely wash over me. I looked out the tinted window as the heavy car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the smoldering wreckage of their pathetic schemes entirely behind. I was finally free. I was utterly untouchable. And as I stared directly at the sprawling, brilliantly illuminated skyline of the magnificent city that now permanently belonged to me, I was deeply, profoundly looking forward to expanding my glorious, unmatched empire, knowing that the legacy I was building would endure forever, completely unchallenged by anyone from my painful past. True power does not announce itself with screaming threats or forged documents. It arrives silently, meticulously calculated, and completely inevitable. For years, I allowed my family's relentless cruelty to define my worth, accepting the role of the quiet, unremarkable scapegoat while they paraded their manufactured superiority. They believed my silence was submission. They never realized it was preparation. The most profound lesson I learned from watching my family's empire collapse under the weight of its own corruption is that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Toxic families operate on a currency of control, using guilt, obligation, and intimidation to keep you tethered to their dysfunction. They will demand your absolute loyalty while actively plotting your ruin. Breaking free requires more than just physical distance. It demands absolute financial and emotional independence. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire simply to keep your family warm. When those who share your blood weaponize your trust, the most powerful response is not to engage in their chaotic screaming matches. The ultimate victory is quietly building your own fortress, securing your own future, and letting the natural consequences of their deceit systematically destroy them. I did not ruin my family. I merely handed them the bill for their own catastrophic choices, and I refuse to pay it for them ever again. Let my journey be a testament to the overlooked daughters and the underestimated siblings. Your quiet endurance and your refusal to break under their pressure are your greatest assets. Build your empire in the shadows and secure your safety net. Share your experiences of setting boundaries and reclaiming your peace in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to join a community dedicated to breaking toxic cycles and taking back control. Remember, your ultimate security lies in your independence.